Don't encourage me, otherwise we won't even get to the speakers tonight. Right, there's some seats down here in the cheap seats at the front here. So, but you are closer to the speakers, so that's the offsetting thing. Okay, welcome to the 50th anniversary of the Calgary Mountain Club. When I was treasurer of the club about 30 years ago, and I was fiddling the books to make us look legal, I never thought we'd reach 50. But, I shouldn't say things like that. Anyway, my name is Mike Mortimer, and I joined the CMC in 1979. And what I'm going to do tonight is just introduce the speakers and try and keep things on time. We ask you at this point to turn off any cell phones, any other things that beep, please, would be much appreciated. Also, so we're going to do three shows, and then we're going. What's that? Yeah. He's new. Okay, that's good. But after the break, there's going to be a draw for some North Face prizes, 2 jackets and a tent. So hang on to your tickets. And if you talk to me at the break, we might be able to advance your tickets closer to the top for a certain. So the evening presentation is 7 slideshows. Each show is going to last about 15 minutes. Towards the end, it'll seem like an hour, but it's only 15 minutes. Then after 3, we'll have a break, and then after 3, and then 4 more shows after that. It's going to be a great evening. Now, to give you some background to the Mountain Club and the fact that it's so open to anybody, I want to tell you just briefly the first time I ever went to the Calgary Mountain Club. And it was down at the Cecil Bar in Calgary, and John Northwood and I went down there, and everybody was really, really friendly to us, until John said, "Oh, we're from the Alpine Club." And everybody moved away, except one guy who came back just to give us hell. So after that, we thought, plan B, we'll try a more sociable setting. And we went to a dinner, and I bumped into Trevor, and my life and liver have never been the same since. So. But it's a great club to be in. We're not particular, as I was told tonight by our president. Anybody can join, and the advantage of joining is that you get on our email list. But if you don't want to join, you can still get on our email list. Finances have never been a strong point. When I was treasurer, I was told we either had $1,000 or $3,000 in the bank, but had we paid the bill for the previous year's dinner. So I phoned them up and I said, well, I had to repay you. And they said, well, you should pay us and you're never coming back. So for my first years in the Mountain Club, I was going around trying to find places where we could have dinners. It wasn't easy. Nor will it be easy tomorrow night. I was away, and I'm to be the MC tomorrow night, so I'm wearing my bun-proof jacket, and we'll come prepared. But anyway, let's get straight into this. So the first slideshow is going to be by Chick Scott. To introduce Chick Scott is it's sort of a bit of a waste of time, but for those of you who don't know him, no, it's a waste of time. Where is Chick? You know my opinion now of all the slideshows, and I don't know why we're even doing this. But anyway, Chick Scott joined the CMC in 1963. Chick's background as a climber and skier go back to 62. Since then, his accomplishments have been as varied as his later books. Chick cut his teeth on the first winter ascents of Hungabi and Assiniboine. In 1968, he spent 5 seasons at the International School of Mountaineering in Lausanne in Switzerland, along with Mike Galbraith. During this period, he guided some of the hardest routes in the Alps. Back in Canada, he took part in the first complete ski traverse from Jasper to Lake Louise. Later on, he undertook other ski endeavors, such as Rogers Pass to the Bugaboos and Northern Selkirk's ski traverse. Chick's Himalayan experiences also include an attempt on Dhaulagiri and a successful ascent of, I can't even pronounce the name of it.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it, The first Himalayan success by a Canadian. Today, Chick makes his living as a writer, and he lives in Banff. So please welcome Chick, and his slideshow is called The Birth of a Club. Chick Scott.
Thank you, Mike. Wow, what a great turnout, what a great evening. We're all thrilled to be here, and me as much as anybody. There were times when I didn't think it was going to happen. My apologies to my fellow speakers tonight. I harassed them for the last month to get things rolling, and we eventually got it here. I would particularly like to thank Ken Chow, who put the show together. It's all one complete PowerPoint show that should actually work because it was put together by somebody who knew what they were doing. So thank you, Ken. Okay, so to get things started on my show, I'm just going to read the first little bit so I get it right. For the first 50 years of the 20th century, the Alpine Club of Canada tried to create a mountain culture here in this country and to turn Canadians into mountain climbers. Unfortunately, they had only limited success. But after the Second World War, thousands of young people came to Canada from war-ravaged Europe and Britain. Many of them came west to the Rocky Mountains, and they could climb and ski a little bit, yodel, sing songs, and they knew what mountain culture was. They were free-spirited, adventurous, and just wanted to have fun. Okay, let's see if it works. It did, it worked well. And in 1960, they got together and formed the Calgary Mountain Club. Okay. Oh, there it is. So in 1960, they formed the Calgary Mountain Club. For the next 30 years, this would be the leading mountain climbing club in Canada, and by the end of the century, Canada would be recognized around the world as one of the leading alpine nations. The founding members of the club included such notables as Brian Greenwood, was a founding member, Glenn Bowles, who's in the audience tonight. A lot of us know Glenn. Don Vaucrod, who's in the audience tonight. He was a founding member. Dick Lofthouse, who I'm not sure whether he's in the audience tonight, was actually back in Britain going to school for a couple of years in 1960 when the club was formed. But as soon as he came back to Canada, he joined the club. And this guy, Lloyd McKay, who was just finishing law school in Nova Scotia, he joined the club as soon as he came west. The club, of course, in those days had a big Austro-German Swiss element, lots of yodeling. Guys like Dieter Rohbach, Gunty Prins, and Klaus Hahn on the right there were members of the club from Austria and Germany. Klaus is in the audience tonight. This guy here, Heinz Kahl, was an early active member. He was from Germany. And the guy on the left there, Franz Dopf, was also an early member and a founding member. He's in the audience tonight. He came to Canada with his partner, who you see here, Hans Moser, the famous Hans Moser. Hans, of course, went to Banff very early on to work as a mountain guide. But Franz stayed here in Calgary and was very active in the Calgary Mountain Club. And there were some pretty hot climbing girls, too, like Inga Steinbach, who is also in the audience tonight. Now, Inga Stoltz, she was a hot climber. And the lady on the right here is Lilo Schmidt, now Lilo Führer. These two women were the first women to climb Diratissima on Yam. The woman on the left is a Canadian girl, Betty King, and she has a route named after on Yamnuska called King's Chimney, which she did the first ascent of. And there were a few Canadians in the club. This guy, Bill Waslinchuk, was the first president. The guy on the right there, Gordon Crocker, was the third president. He's born in Canada, Canadian. And the guy on the left, Max Wolfe, was the second president. Gordon was the third president. Max was from Scotland. And this is where they climbed. The Alpine Club of Canada had the rest of the mountains. They had all those big ones to the west, but we got Yamnuska. That's our mountain. Great. Yamnuska is our mountain, and we climbed there every weekend in the summer. We went up there when it was raining and cloudy and miserable. We went there in the winter. We climbed on Yam in the winter. We loved that place. That was our mountain. The Chinook wind blowing, the ravens riding the wind above the cliff. It was just a beautiful place. And we did, during the 60s, not me, but my friends, did a bunch of new routes. Here's Heinz Call topping out on Red Shirt in 1962, the first ascent of Red Shirt. Gunty Prinz took that picture. He went up the backside and caught Heinz just as he came over the top. This is an early photograph of Don Vockroff on an early attempt on the Bowl route. Inga Steinbach took that photograph of Don. She and Don got almost to the top, within 60 feet of the top, and had to rappel off in the middle of the night, body wrap rappels with a flashlight in their teeth. Pretty bold. There's Don on Pangolin, an early picture of Pangolin that I think was climbed in 65. And here's Dick Lofthouse, and I think that's probably on Chalkstone Corner, probably an early attempt or the first ascent of Chalkstone Corner. All of those were climbed in the 60s. We also skied. This is Klaus Hahn on the left and Doug Wan at the big race that we organized, the Sunwapta Giant Slalom up at Parker Ridge. We got a lot of notable people there. We got the whole national ski team came and participated. Here's Nancy Green accepting her ladies champion trophy from Charlie Nelson. Right between them there, you can see Brian Greenwood, and off to the left, you can see Al Cole, who I think is probably in the audience tonight, and we had a good time. The club is famous for having a good time. And this is the Cirrus Mountain Campground the next morning, cleaning up. That's Pete Cooper, who used to write for the Calgary Albertan. And we got a reputation. This is the start of our reputation for hard partying. So a club like this with so much fun, so much energy and activity, so free-spirited, what they did is they reached the young people, and we loved it. So guys like Charlie Locke, this is Charlie here, who many of us know, Donnie Gardner, we joined the club in about 63, 64. John Martin joined the club about the same time. That's a little older picture of John. I didn't have a young picture of John. John joined the club, and then Murray Toft. This is Murray. This is Murray when he was about 17 years old. And Murray joined the club in about 67 or 68. And of course, we all wanted to do something. We were reading these great books from Europe by Walter Benatti and Herman Boole and Gaston Rebefat, and we were inspired. So one of the things we did was winter climbing. And this is Don Gardner's picture of Charlie Locke on the winter traverse of Mount Rundle in 1964. They were only 18 years old. This is my photograph of Brian Greenwood at the top of Mount Hungabi in 1966, first winter ascent. There's Donnie's picture of Eckhard Grassmann, who was from Switzerland, on Mount Assiniboine in 1967, the first winter ascent. And here's a beautiful picture. This is Donnie's photograph of Eckhard on top of Mount Victoria in 1968, the first winter ascent of Mount Victoria. And we also started looking at the big north faces. All the north faces in the Rockies, almost all of them, were unclimbed at that time. And these two guys, Charlie Locke on the left, Brian Greenwood on the right, they teamed up in the summer of 1966 and did one of the first north face ascents. They did what's called the Greenwood Lock route now on the north face of Mount Temple. And then the next summer of 1967, Don Vockroff, Ken Baker, and Lloyd McKay teamed up to climb that big pillar there, the north buttress of House Peak, beautiful 4,000-foot line. And those were amongst the two first big north face ascents. And of course, skiing. We love skiing. The club still loves ski mountaineering. And the big thing to do in 1967 was to ski the Great Divide Traverse from Jasper to Lake Louise. Donnie on the left in the check shirt, Neil Liskey, Charlie Locke, and myself, we teamed up in May of 1967 to ski from Jasper to Lake Louise. We were 20 years old. We registered out for 35 days. If we don't come back in 35 days, we're somewhere between Jasper and Lake Louise. So we skied all those ice fields. We had one shovel, no beacon, no GPS, God, wool clothing, I don't know. And you'll see our skis here. We had wooden cross-country skis and we used wax. Yeah, so it was a great adventure, still the greatest adventure of my life. We were actually quite organized, and we built huts. This was our first hut at the top of the 3-4 couloir, the Graham Cooper hut, built in 1964 and named after Graham Cooper, one of our members who got killed building the hut. This is the Castle Mountain hut, which is still up there on Castle Mountain. It was built in '67, and it's now owned by the Alpine Club. And we started to look around the world. Canadians had never gone anywhere and done anything, really. Almost nothing. And we looked, of course, to Chamonix. Chamonix was fabulous. The Drew, there's the Drew in the middle. Some of the early guys to go there were Lloyd, Dick Lofthouse, and Brian Greenwood. I went in 1968 and climbed there for 5 summers. Lloyd came over and joined me in 1973. And here's a picture I took of Lloyd way up in the north face of the Drew. And here's maybe the best climbing picture I ever took. This is Lloyd on the north face of Lake Court, above the Argentière Glacier near Chamonix. And that picture was on the cover of Mountain 46, the world's leading climbing magazine. Canadians finally were entering into the world arena. And then later that year of '73, I went off to the Himalayas with a British expedition. This is a photograph I took of Roger Brooke on the ridge of Dhaulagiri 4. We didn't get up Dhaulagiri 4. We had to climb over a 21,000-foot mountain to even get to see the summit. And I managed to reach the top of that. And there I am standing on the top of Mayagdi Matha is the name. And it was the first Himalayan peak ever climbed by a Canadian. And no, we didn't get up Dhaulagiri 4, but in future years, the Calgary Mountain Club would do fabulous things, and this was just the start. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Are you coming up again? To Mike to introduce our next speaker.
See, I told you Chick would need no introduction. So, but by way of introductions, let me introduce the next speaker, Urs Callan. Urs joined the club in 1966. He's an honorary member. And his show tonight will be called The Glory Days. Urs was already an accomplished climber when he came to Canada in 1965 from Switzerland. Upon moving to Calgary, Urs put up first ascents on the north faces of Mounts Fay, Athabasca, Victoria, and Patterson. Later on, he was to establish new routes on Yamnuska, such as CMC Wall and the Yellow Edge. In 1997, along with Jeff Marshall, he celebrated his first ascent of the CMC Wall by free climbing it on the 25th anniversary of the first ascent. So Urs has under his belt such climbs as the second ascent of the east face of Babel, Chinaman's North Face, and Balrog, as well as many early repeats on such as the Becky Chenard on the east face of Bugaboo Spire and the Super Couloir on Delta Form. So without further ado, please welcome Urs Callan.
Okay, let's just leave my notes down there. What happened to somebody? Find the button, where is it? So, here is the Kandertal in Switzerland. This is where both Gerda and I were born. And in 1965, we decided to leave beautiful Switzerland, beautiful Bernese Overland, and come to Canada. First, we stopped in Toronto, and we stayed there for a year. This actually is a famous line. Some of you might recognize it. It's on top of the choke, possibly a first ascent, because John Turner, I think, went out to the right of me, out the orange wall there, and we completed the ramp.
Mike, I think you're a little
Too close. Get it back, or turn it down. And this is, lovely ladies, my wife Gerda. You can see this is at Boneco Lake Massina, and to start most climbs, you actually have to have a boat, and you climb right out of a boat. It's quite a unique place. Here we are in a ghost, but I do have to mention that we liked it very much in Ontario. And till one day I got a postcard from Klaus Hahn, and it had Moraine Lake on it. And we said, holy smoke, let's load the stuff up. We gotta go up there. And Klaus Hahn is up there in the audience tonight. So one of our first mountain club outings went to the Ghost. And I can say I wasn't too impressed at the Ghost. I don't think I went back for years because we encountered this dust storm. But here we are. I made lots of new friends. Dick Howe is on top. He's sitting in the back of the audience. Then there's myself, Billy Davidson, and Stu Slyman, just fooling around and yam. And this is, of course, Eckhart's famous Land Rover, George Homer on the left. We went out climbing, and George and me talked Eckhart in that with the Land Rover, he should really be able to drive right to the base. So Eckhart was our game. He pointed it up. And as we drove up the hill, Billy and Brian Greenwood had to jump off the trail because we were coming up the trail. And then we parked it partway up, and we went and climbed Forbidden Corner that day, and did the third ascent. And when we came down, Eckhart sat in the Land Rover, turned it around, but he got really scared because it looked so steep. And he jumped out, and the Land Rover took off, and it bounced down the hill and smashed into some bushes where it stopped. This is Brian Greenwood, of course, a big name on the local climbing scene at the time. Brian did the first ascent of Belfry in 1957, all on natural gear and machine nuts slung on cord, way ahead of the clean climbing craze that came supposedly from Yosemite. Brian came back in '68 from Yosemite, and he didn't succeed on a big wall, and he was really annoyed. And he said, you know, in order to make it down there, we gotta have an 8 climb where we can practice and we can gym hard and we can haul. Otherwise, we're never gonna make it. And on the shittiest day in May, he pulled me up there and says, let's go start on one. And a super direttissimo, he called it at the time. So here is Brian on the first pitch of CMC wall. Later on, the youngster Billy Davidson joined us. And first time I went climbing with him on Balrog, he was really, really slow. In fact, as I was belaying him, I watched a wood tick crawl up the rope. And I waited for it till he got to me, then I flicked it off. And then I saw it come up a second time. And I said, hey Bill, what's taking so long? But don't let that fool you. Billy might have been slow, but he got up the hardest walls in Yosemite. And then in 1970, Brian and I finally got over the overhangs, into the big corner on CMC wall. And we got to this run-out section, and Brian said, okay, Urs, you can go up there and free climb this bit, as he called it. And I said, no, Brian, why don't you do it? And we looked at each other and we had a little discussion. And we agreed we should have had Ian Hayes with us. He would have been the man that could have done it. So we wrapped off. course, as a Baccarat on the bowl, it was still bodily pelts, no prusik for backup, no nuts at the end of the rope. You really had to watch what you were doing. And the next rappel actually went over the big roof, and I went down first, and just as I got to the edge, 2 pins popped, and the 3 of us shock-loaded the only bolt that was left. And it held, close call. Then in 1970, we went back to Switzerland. I got a lot of climbing done there. Actually looked fit, I was fit. Same time Billy went to Yosemite, and he succeeded in climbing the NA wall, which was supposed to be the hardest climb in the world. That's what Trinard, Frost, Robbins, and Pratt said. And Billy did it. They were in shock down in the valley. And we had our first big waller, thanks to Brian's training vision on Yam. We had somebody that succeeded. We came back in 72, and CMC wall still wasn't climbed. So I said to Billy, let's just go and do that. Because I was kind of annoyed that I missed out on the NA wall. So I chucked up the fixed ropes that were in questionable shape from 2 years. And Billy led up through the roofs. And slowly, over 3 days, we realized that this actually wasn't fun climbing. We were having all kinds of issues with, like I said, pins popping, bolts pulling, a scary bivvy in slings, and then the infamous rivet bolt ladder that had shoelaces for quick draws. And when we got to the top, I don't think we even shook hands. We just walked off, and we were kind of disgusted. This is not what climbing is supposed to be. And as we got down to the quarry, it dawned on us, we don't really need the climbing gear anymore. We'll just dump it here. We're never going to climb again. And we walked over to the Trans-Canada and hitched a ride home. A few days later, Billy changed his mind, and he got his girlfriend to drive him up, and he went and got the gear. This is young John Lachlan, 18 years old, and he went and talked to Billy. He wanted to go climbing, but Billy said, I'm not really sure. Why don't you talk to Urs? Maybe he'll go climbing. So John and myself went climbing for a while, and right off the start, it was obvious that John was a very aggressive, dynamic climber, and that didn't really need to learn much from me. He was already in the groove. Here we see him with brand new calcaires, styling on Big Rock in Okotoks. And of course, here it is John. This is Jim Elsinga's picture. John on Slipstream on the first ascent. Slipstream really opened up what could be done on alpine ice. And I think it showed the rest of the world that to look at ice climbing with a whole new outlook. Meanwhile, Billy had been trying another line, Yellow Edge, and he was up there with various partners, but he wasn't getting anywhere. And he talked to me, and I said, fine, let's go and knock this thing off. So we went on Yellow Edge. Everything went fine. We both knew how to do it now. This is now me in a second bivvy. And that night, there used to be a game farm lower down. I think it belonged to Al Oming, and he had all kinds of exotic animals there. we saw him walk around with the cougar, and we noticed that night he had a wolf pack there. And we started howling like the wolves, and they would answer us back. This was great fun. We did that for a while until, I presume it was Al Omen came out and yelled, "Shut up!" And we thought, this is cool, so we waited for Al to go to bed and did it over again. We had a lot of fun with that during the night. This is looking down the next day. Billy had to bivvy on the other ledge way down there because there wasn't enough time to make it up the day before. Right about where he is now, I was having some difficulties. I was totally getting sketchy and ran out in my Robbins boots. Had one pin in back on a traverse somewhere, and I was just starting to sweat, when all of a sudden John Lachlan yelled up from below and said, "Hey guys, that looks amazing." And I looked down and I saw John Lachlan and Jack Firth standing on the trail below. And that was the shot of energy I needed to put a rivet in, put a shoelace quick draw on, and I was good. But here you can see, this time we get to the top smiling. We'll climb again, no problem. The glory shot, we're out of there. That's Yellow Edge there. And then over the years, this says about 74, Billy started to change. He's beginning to look like a hippie. And then he disappeared for the year. He went to the coast. When he came back in 75, he obviously changed. I talked him into trying one more 8-line on Little Goat, which was supposed to be training for the Shield. But Billy wanted to take 3 weeks on the Shield, and I just couldn't get that kind of time off. And that was the end of that. But in the middle is young Robbie Mitchell. That's with us that day for training. And then in 79, Billy came back the last time. We climbed the first pitch on Red Shirt, and Billy said, "I don't feel like climbing anymore. It's not my thing. Can we go down?" So we went down and we hiked up Yan. And that night we went to the bar, the Cecil, and we talked till 1 o'clock, till closing. They threw us out. And 10 after 1, the big news the next day in the newspaper was that 10 after 1, 2 employees got shot by a disgruntled employee. So Bill came back to my house to say goodbye the next day. And he said, "You know, I don't really want to live in a city like that where they murder one another." And that was the last I saw of Bill. This here, we're getting into the good guy thing. This is Trevor Jones that's in the audience, and me. This, it was supposed to be a short walk on Delta Form, but things were a little different. Anyhow, I asked Trevor, what about that George Lowe pitch? George said it was the hardest pitch in his life. It took him 8 hours. And Trevor said, "Well, piss on it." So overnight, the weather changed, and it turned into a full-blown storm. And we figured it was safer to go up rather than come down. And we battled our way through that, total of 4 days. But we were always in the white zone. For those of you that don't know the zone system, Tobin Sorensen figured that there is a white zone where you are in control, the gray zone where you are half in control and God has the other half, and a black zone where you're in God's hands. By the way, Tobin was on Alberta that same weekend in the same storm. He didn't make it. Now here's Tim Friesen, another good guy. I have to say the good guy thing is one of my sayings. I supposedly said, and it stuck to me, that if you want to do hard climbs, you have to climb with good guys. Tim is one of them. Trevor was one of them. Whoa, I gotta go back. There we go. And with us that day is Dave Cheeseman. Now Dave Cheeseman was a super climber extraordinaire. With Dave, you'd go on anything, and that's why we're on Northwind. But as we were climbing here, Cheeseman, and our rocks were coming down all around us, I quickly realized that from the white zone, we were going to the grey zone, fast moving towards the black zone, and I asked Dave and Tim to go down. I wanted to get off. That's what we did, and the next day Dave and Tim went back up, and over 5 days did a variation on the low zones. Amazing. Then at about the same time, Vilna Mitchell was also around. She climbed with us, and she was quickly becoming an accomplished rock and ice climber. I still remember I was with Vilma on the Bekkisvinard, and the weather didn't look that good, and I said we should go down. And then I said to Vilma, you know, the reason that I wanted to go down is I don't want to be the one that has to go and talk to your mom and dad and tell them that something happened to you. And she quit back and said, Urs, I wouldn't want anybody else but you to do that. And a year later, I did it. Now I come to Babel. Babel was Brian Greenwood's badass test piece. Over 14 years, it did not see a second ascent, and it was not for lack of people trying. So I talked to Dave and I said, let's go and get that second ascent done. So here we are. We actually went light and fast. You can tell we got the right pants on, a small rack, no, small pack, and we hiked in the rock shoes. Instead of hiking shoes, we hiked and climbed in those. And actually it worked. We got up the famous pitches, the Horror Chimney Pitch, we got up the Mud Pitch, the Crumbly Traverse, the Killer Pillar Pitch, and here we are on the Crux Pitch. But to save time and to make sure we get that second ascent, we French freed it. But for those of you out there that want to do something amazing, this one is impressive. Now here is Dave on the top, and I picked this slide because as I was sorting through the slides for this show, I realized the importance of this one. You can see on his left hand he has a blue glove on. That morning at the start of the climb, Dave dropped the other one, and he ran after it, but it tumbled down and it was gone. And Dave was visibly very upset. And he told me, he said, those were my lucky gloves. I got them from my mom. Dave's luck lasted 4 more years. Now this is Billy in 2003. For those of us that know what Warren Harding looks like, it's an amazing similarity. Warren Harding was Billy's idol. He wanted to be just like him. We got word that they found Billy's body washed up on a beach on the coast. And a few of us drove up there to Sointula to take part in the memorial. And we listened to many stories. And this is basically what Billy did for 29 years, live out of his kayak, travel in a kayak, stay out there for 6 months or longer. And he even called themselves Kayak Bill. I met Billy's son, Westerly. Here is the group of us that drove out. Brian Greenwood on the left, myself. The woman in the middle was Billy's partner, Gary Jennings, Dave Perry Davis, sorry, and Rob Woods in the back. And of course, Billy's kayak in the front. Now we come to the end of my show. This is one of my favorite mountain club shots. It shows Judy Sterner, John Lachlan, and Bruce Keller, Billy on the right, on top of El Cat. They went up there, as was tradition then, to go and help the climbing team, which was Billy and Gary Jennings, that came up the triple direct. And for those of us that knew John well, we can tell that when John looked like that, he was in one of his fine moods. So that's why I call these the happy days of the Mountain Club. Indeed, those were the glory days.
Okay. Before we go into our next show, I have to tell my one Swiss joke, but this is for Urs's benefit. And most of you more than likely won't understand it, but that's not going to stop me from telling it. And it's the fact that if a train is late in Switzerland, you can assume one of two things. A, either it's a foreign train, or B, you don't have a Swiss watch. I like that. I think that's very funny, but what the hell. Okay, Pat Morrow, he joined the club in 1970. Pat originally hails from Kimberley, and he discovered climbing when he moved to Calgary. In 71, he made the first winter traverse of Mount Assiniboine, but it was his ascent of Everest in 1982 on the Canadian Mount Everest expedition that led Pat to start a journey that led him to become the first person to climb the highest peaks on every continent. This endeavor would become known as the Seven Summits. Pat's experiences have taken him on a 10,000 kilometer sojourn through the Himalayas with his wife Babel. In 1987, Pat was awarded the Order of Canada. In 1978, it was taken away. No, that's not true. They realized the mistake. Pat makes his living as an adventure cameraman and photographer, and it's a great privilege to introduce Pat, and his show is called The British Invasion. Pat Morrow.
And I just want to begin by saying big thank you to everyone who sent slides from the early 70s to mid 70s to supplement my own slides. And I'm afraid that, and I have to say that even though we're trying to include everyone that ever was through the club, it's almost impossible. So there are going to be a lot more slides tomorrow night at the party that didn't make it into these shows tonight. So hope you can turn out for that. Now, when Britain was sending its convicts to Australia, it was sending its drunkards to Calgary. And this is one of my earliest climbing partners, Steve Jennings, out of London. He claims that the monkey was corrupting him in this case. And Steve Langley, once he had a few pints in his belly, showed off his command of British cuisine. And that Chris Perry, that party animal, he gets a little bit rowdy. And we had, in the early 70s, we had the base camp team, Joe Henderson and Chris Taylor in the lower left. And that's Chris, again, up at the Archie Simpson hut with Greg Brennan and Nancy and Sarah. And the Archie Simpson hut was right in behind Yamnuska, and that's where we based our climbing on the crags in those days. So Mike mentioned I'm from Kimberley, and as a 16-year-old, actually, I'd heard about the Calgary Mountain Club, and I sent a letter to generally to the club, telling them that I was going to be coming to Calgary and study journalism here at SAIT. And I got this amazing letter back from the club president, Archie Simpson, not only suggesting I come in to visit the club itself, but that Hans Mosier had shipped out a bunch of food that Archie had thrown into these 20-gallon drums to the west side of the Hauser Spires. And for $20, I could have one of those cans of food. So here I am, this young neophyte climber, thinking I'm going to come to Calgary and learn a few things about climbing, but I was invited to the backside of the Hausers, the very first mountain experience I had. Archie was a wonderful person born in China and came over to Canada and was very, one of the best, I guess, representatives of climbing insofar as being able to gather people together. Jeff Horn on the left and Ray Breeze were in there as well. That's the camp that they had established right underneath the Hauser Spires. And Jeff and Ray actually went up on the Becky Chenard route and discovered one of Fred Becky's pitons from the 60s. So they ended up doing a second ascent of that goes right up the main prow there. Archie and Oliver Wilcock and various other Brits went up on the western side and did a new route. And on the right-hand side, you see the minaret. And a couple or 3 years later, John Jones and Jerry Rogan and George Homer came and put a route up on that. Now, in those days, it was before people were really serious about training. So the absolute closest that anyone came to training was to go down to the Big Rock on Wednesday nights, get pumped, and then go to the bar later on. And this is Greenwood getting pumped, and nicotine is at the same time. But he was great. He was sort of the elder statesman of the Brits. Most of the other Brits that were coming over in the early 70s were only a few years older than I was. Jerry Rogan and Jack Firth came down to the Rock with their mountain boots because they wanted to get out in the mountains. It translated straight across into doing big stuff in the nearby Rockies. Now, my ambitions were to become some kind of a photojournalist and make my living doing what I love to do. So during the course at SAIT, I produced a little magazine with some of the stories and pictures that I had taken and others had taken. This is a shot that John Jones gave me from CMC Valley behind Yamnuska. And even though I had grand ambitions to be a photographer, the general feeling amongst the club in those days, and I think probably more among the Brits in those days, was that they didn't want to have anything to do with being photographed and then have the picture sensationalized in the general interest magazines. And Steve Jennings was one of them. And actually, I think more than that, the camera got in the way of the experience. And so I got back at the bugger, took him skiing. We tried to do a winter ascent of Mustea Peak with Murray Toft. And Steve wasn't the only Brit struggling with skiing. John Jones and Dick Loftus and Brian Greenwood and one or two others, Archie maybe, thrashed their way up to the base of Eisenhower South Tower if only they had known how easy it would have been on skis. And I think that's why Scott died in Antarctica, wasn't it? Didn't know anything about travel in winter on skis. Nor did the Brits know anything about ice hockey. That's Nigel Helliwell on the left, Bugs McKeith crouched down on the right, Chris Perry with the saggy ankles in the middle. And I think that's a Swiss referee there, Urs, just to the left. But you get these guys onto vertical ice, and it's another story. Now, that's Chris on maybe the second or third ascent of Cascade Waterfall, with using ice hammer and straight-shafted Chenard axe. And we had to cut steps to make our way. It took about 8 hours to get up there in those days. That was 71. The next year, I guess later that winter, I was inspired by my heroes Chick Scott and Brian Greenwood and Donnie Gardner, and they'd been up there a few years before doing the first winter ascent of Assiniboine. And I headed off with two other equally inexperienced climbers, Skip King, who was a member of the club, and Jonas Krallis, a buddy of mine. We got to the top right at dusk, perfect timing. It was minus 26. And we ended up diving down the south side to find snow to dig a cave, and we somehow survived the night in a cave without any sleeping bags. But that experience was so, the fact that I survived it, I was actually thrilled and wanted to get more of that kind of stuff. Now, Chris Perry, I met him probably about the second or third week that he arrived in Canada to work teaching at SAIT. And I just wanted to show this picture. He's coming off of the first ascent of the Blade in the Opal Range. Check out the EBs that he's using to run down the scree with. In those days, we just had the old smooth-soled shoes that we used for the approach and the descent and the rock climbing itself. We did a lot of adventuresome climbs together. We went and tried to do the first ascent of the east face of Leaning Tower in the southern Purcells. But over the years, you've come to see his name on all kinds of amazing routes in the Rockies, and he's authored the rock climbing guide to the Bow Valley. And Trevor Jones took this on the first ascent of the Gold Buttress that they did together. Now, Alistair Bugs McKeith I never, unfortunately, climbed with Bugs, but I certainly drank a few pints with him, and he was a real spark plug and inspiration to this young Kimberley boy. And had a touch of class, too, there's a Bugs McKeith tea party on top of Yam. And he did this route with Chris Sideline, one of my favorite routes. Did quite a few significant climbs here in the Rockies, as well as South America and Yosemite and the Alps. And not only was he a good climber, he was also a caver. And this is in Gargantuan Cave. Ian Rowe gave me this picture. And I think he was involved in a rescue down in the cave as well. Now, this looks like a group of future real estate agents in Canada. That's actually the core of the refinement of ice climbing, which was invented, like waterfall ice climbing was invented in Canada. Tim Odger on the left, John Lachlan, and then the Brits, Jack Firth and Bugs and Rob Wood. And the early to mid 70s was where it was happening. The equipment wasn't very good because it just hadn't been refined and invented yet. And these guys took on these big waterfalls. That's Nemesis on Stanley Headwall. Had to use a bit of aid here and there. And if you ever tried to climb on the tools that we were using in those days, you'd know why. And then Bugs teamed up with the Burgess twins. That's Al. And because they're identical, I don't have to show a picture of aid. And they went up on Polar Circus, and that was one of the biggest waterfalls to be climbed in, I think, in the early to mid 70s. Jack Firth, another hard man. I was really lucky to join him and John Lachlan on a couple of beautiful climbs, including first ascent of Guinness Gully at minus 30 or something. Now, just for fun, just for the fun of it, I emailed the picture on the right to Homeland Security, and the one on the left to Alcoholics Anonymous. So when you leave the auditorium tonight, don't be surprised if you get strip searched in the hallway or offered an invitation to Women's Temperance League tea party. Yeah, Dr. John Jones. He was into traditional crag and bigger, longer traditional routes when he first arrived in Canada. And he teamed up quickly with George Homer, another really good climber. And the two of them did Necromancer on Yam. And John went on to do some climbing in the Himalaya, and then he got big into sport climbing and created many beautiful routes that I'm sure all of you have climbed over time. George, after his intensive several years of climbing here, moved over to the Columbia Valley with Nancy and Sarah and built a Hogan near the Blaeberry River. Dick Howe, like many of the Brits, was into the folk music scene here. There were lots of the Brits were musicians and singers, and also like many other members of the Calgary Mountain Club, we were also volunteers with the Calgary Mountain Rescue Group. And there's Dick and Billy on a rescue. I went out, Steve Jennings and I drove out there, and we helped take this young guy off of the east end of Rundle. But this was in the days before the great rescue services from K Country and Banff Park were formed. And there's Dick with Dave Reed, or also known as New Wave Dave or Easy Street Rocker. One springtime in 1977, when many members of the club were off on expeditions in the Himalaya or Yosemite or other places, a group of us, Bugs included, formed a small group called Calgary Leftovers on Denali, and we headed up to Alaska, Expedition Claude. And this is our group, Bernard Amon on the left, John and Bugs, and Al Derbyshire in the back, Eckhart Grassman, Dave Reed, Roger Marshall, and the token Canadian on the right. Once we got on the mountain, most of the guys went for the West Rib route, which is kind of above the ski tip, and climbed halfway up the mountain and then branched over to the right and did the Claude Face. And Bernard and I did a new route on the Sunlit Buttress on the left. But Roger Marshall here in the foreground is the one that actually got the permit for Everest in 1982 and invited me along as the photographer, and also Dave Reed that was on that trip. That's the picture on the rib that Bernard and I climbed. And Speedy Smith earned his nickname on Gritstone crags in Britain, and when he got over here, he joined up with several high-altitude expeditions. He was really a workhorse, and here he is loading a rock into Bill March's pack at the start of the trek into Everest. Trevor Jones had a fleet of taxis at one time, and here he is getting his trainer's license. He was also a collector of fine art photography. A couple more hard men, Al Derbyshire and Chalk Quinn. Brian Blob Wyville's mother didn't let him leave Britain until he was properly toilet trained. And he's done so many big routes, he couldn't remember whether this was on Trolltend Wall in Norway or Leaning Tower with Saul Greenberg in Yosemite. But I wanted to show this picture because it shows you just how far the Brits have fallen since they came to Canada. They're actually drinking Canadian beer. Elaine Brooke was around the club for a year or two, and she went on to spend 12 years living and working in the Himalaya, and I believe she's back in Britain now. Dave Morgan believed in light and fast, and with Albie Soul on your team on the Everest Light expedition in 1986, who needed Sherpas? Carl Hannigan, veterinarian, who went along to play doctor with the climbing animals on all those big expeditions. Sean Doherty was such a talented climber that occasionally had to climb with a handicap. Ian Rowe, he moved over to the Columbia Valley as well and joined up with some of the climbers, Kiwi Gallagher and Tim Odger on Pomori. And now we come to current day CMCers. Where are they now? The ones that survived, that is. Chaz Young, still going strong, climbing and caving. Dick Howe had a medical mishap, but he's still out there with his buddies, going into the mountains. Dave Reed keeps sending me these pictures of himself surrounded by young girls, and I presume that they're his daughters, but he never really lets on. But he was sorry he couldn't be here tonight, but he sent a nice greeting to the club, which I'll read out. The Calgary Mountain Club was just what I needed in my life, and man, I had a good time within its big open heart. All the best to the climbers who haven't fallen off yet, and to those other guys who are not with us anymore. I think about them often. And he goes on to say, I'm still living the crazy life that you remember me by. I'm still wrapping a towel around my waist, letting it drop to the floor, and frightening the bathers around swimming pools. Steve Jennings, this was in 1971, and this could be Steve Jennings in 2010. He's been a professional fishing guide for the last 20 years in the Caribbean and here in Canada. And he came here from Little Fort, which is near Clearwater. He's here with us tonight. Blob's still cranking him. He lives down in the coast at the moment. And not only is he still really good at rock climbing, but he's big into extreme ice walking. And John Jones is smiling there because Andrea and Sharon are throwing rocks at him, yelling encouragement at Skaha. And Chris Perry's lost a bit of pigment from his hair, but he's still the old Chris Perry. He's still putting up new routes with his son Ian. And there's Jeff Powder with Blob, his son Blob. and I'll just finish with a couple of pictures that Blob gave me, because I think they're such nice portraits of taken recently, like last year down at Red Rocks. Chalk Quinn and Eldar Richard. Thank you.
The Reforming Mountain Club. Okay, the next speaker, Sharon Wood. Sharon joined the Mountain Club in 1977. Sharon's first break came in the world of climbing when she took part in the first all-women's expedition to Mount Logan in 1977. In 1983, she climbed the Cassine Ridge on McKinley. An experience that she gained on this was to serve well on Makalu, Aconcagua, South Face, Huascarán and Sur. In 1986, Sharon became the first North American woman to climb Everest. Today, Sharon makes her living as a motivational speaker, and her show is called Climbers and Other Animals I Have Known. Please welcome Sharon Wood.
Club before it, believe it or not. And I don't make my living as a motivational speaker. Thanks a lot. That's a really nice introduction. Please forgive me. I just want to begin with a bit of an apology if I don't mention everybody. I'm going to give you just a pinhole view of about 10 years of what were kind of the glory days for me in the CMC. And so, and maybe a slightly different view. I'm not going to start with that, but sorry, I had a different beginning just to get me in the mood of being with talking to the CMC, but we won't go there. Or do you want to see him again? Okay. It's kind of cute. That was my first boyfriend. So I'm going to start in the year where I met the first CMC guy. I was, maybe I should start out by saying I was a bit of a misfit when I was a kid, and I was into urban adventure. And my parents sponsored an Outward Bound course for me. They sent me to Outward Bound for a 21-day course. And I was 17 and underage, and they didn't have enough female instructors to teach us everything. And so Laurie Skreslet was my rock climbing instructor. And snappy dresser, eh? And he, you can see how he's pulled that blue toque over his helmet to make sure it goes with his Dimitri sweater. But he was also an amazing coach and instructor and mentor. He was very good at helping you or making you believe that you were capable of doing more than you knew. And he was a pioneer in terms of waterfall ice climbing. This is a picture of him on Whiteman's on the first ascent. And I would run into Laurie again a couple of years later in 1976 when I moved to Alberta for good. I started in Vancouver and worked my way over to Alberta. In fact, it was Gordon Crocker's daughter that told me about a job at the Camp Chief Hector just below Yamnuska, and this is where I really grew up in terms of climbing. And one day I was on Red Shirt climbing with my boyfriend at the time, Chris Miller, and right beside us there was a lot of noise going on on a route that I found out later was called the Bowl. And I later found out that that was Laurie Skreslet and his girlfriend, Lorraine Drews. And the noise was Lorraine Drews was evidently not very happy to be there. But I met them on the way down, hey, and connected again with Laurie, and Laurie took me climbing on Yamnuska a few months later in September, and I really got what Lorraine Drews wasn't happy about. And it's hard to get this picture, but I'm about a few hundred feet off the deck, and I've waited for Laurie in the parking lot for about 3 hours, and we started late, and now it's snowing. But at that year in 1976 was a big year for me because I started working for the Yamnuska Center and met some more snappy dressers like Marnie Virtue here, who was a member of the CMC for a while as well. And this is when I met Dwayne Congdon, who was this very demure, understated, modest, very talented, amazing guy, who 10 years later I would climb Everest with. And then in 1976, in the winter of 1976, I got this letter from Laurie Skreslet writing me on behalf of his girlfriend, Lorraine Drews, who I guess liked me enough, and to join this group of women to climb Mount Logan. And they considered I was one of the more experienced because I had climbed Mount Robson. And so just to point out from left to right, that's Kathy Calvert, Lorraine Drews in the back with the orange hat, Kathy Langell in front, Judy Sterner with the turquoise scarf on, myself, and then Diana Kanak. And I would think about 4 of those members are here tonight. But when you go on an expedition with, sorry Judy, that was the best photo I could find. You sure look a lot better now. And when you join a trip, or when I joined this trip, what I didn't realize is I was actually joining the Calgary Mountain Club. And I turned up at the first meeting I had with these girls was in the CMC hotel. And I barely got in the door when I was assailed by Speedy Smith to buy a membership. And then what I found out is not only was I going to the St. Elias Range with these girls, I was also going with Judy's boyfriend at the time, John Lachlan, and Mike Sawyer, and this yummy guy here, Trevor Jones. I was beginning to realize or figure out, I used to think I was a real weirdo and didn't fit in, but I realized that most of these people I was meeting were weirdos too, you know? And it's only when all those around you are different that you truly belong. And I really felt like, or was beginning to feel like, I found my tribe. We had a lot of waiting around to do and a lot of traveling to do together before we got into the mountain. But you know, all that stuff is pretty interesting with the CMC. So we won't linger long on that photo. So next year was a pretty big year for me too, 1977, because I moved to Field. I wanted to learn how to ice climb. But when I moved to Field, I became very popular because I had a house and a floor to crash on in Field. And so I met a lot of CMC climbers. Jim Elzinga that winter, and I started learning how to ice climb. And, you know, I thought this was a very, thuggish sport, really quite unpleasant. And the guys that I would climb with would channel their way up these waterfalls, knocking off a lot of ice, until I went climbing with Albie Soul one day, and he made this very thuggish sport look very elegant. And he was a master at it, and you would never think he was, because, he was always so disheveled and disorganized. But he'd transform as soon as he got on the ice. He was a genius on ice, and I would spend many trips with this man. In fact, I ended up doing a little trip up the nose route of El Capitan just a year later. And El Capitan, I'm sure most of you know, is in Yosemite Valley, and that's where a lot of us used to go in the spring and the fall when we thought that's where the only climbing was, or at least that's where the good weather was, and still is. But anyway, I was supposed to climb, or I had a dream of climbing that route, and I was going to climb it with my boyfriend at the time, was my boyfriend at the time, John Lachlan. But there is I made the mistake of leaving John alone for a couple of months while I went for a job in BC, and he took up with one of my good friends. And you see, something else I learned about being in the mountain club is you don't really lose your boyfriend, you just lose your turn. So anyway, I went back up there, so Albie took me on, right? And so I went up there with Albie, and I had, I have to say, one of the most intimate experiences in my life up there with Albie. When we were perched side by side on this ledge about 2,000 feet off the deck, shitting into these little mushroom bags, and then twisting them up and hurling off the mountain. I learned a lot on that climb. Now, this is James Blench in a marijuana field. But we met a lot of people that have become lifelong friends now in Yosemite Valley, and James was originally from California and came back with us to work at the Untitled Center. 1982 was a big year, really big year. Starting in February, John Lachlan was killed in an avalanche on Polar Circus, just about in this very place, and this happens to be a picture of John traversing that slope. It was the first death of our generation that we experienced, and John was, as you know, or may know by now, he was a true leader, a very bold climber, very talented, and so it was a tremendous loss for us. Then later on that same year, Canada went to Everest for the first time. Many CMC members were on that expedition, and we know that Laurie Skreslet and Pat Morrow reached the top. So that's all good, but I figured a lot of these folks that went on the team were my peers, and why didn't I go? So a combination of John's death, which had kind of the opposite effect on me, which made me want to get up and off the fence and start climbing and doing something with my life. And my peers going to Everest made me want to start climbing and make sure that I got on to the next team to go to Everest, because there was already a plan afoot to do that in 1986. So I went off to the Cassin Ridge with Greg Cron, and I thought just a year before, Barry Blanchard and this other youngster here, Kevin Doyle, had climbed the Cassin Ridge, and I thought, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. I was pretty naive, I guess. But we did actually do all right, but I just wanted to mention that, I'm not sure if it's true, but Kevin Doyle looks very hunky in this picture, don't you think? and also with that, weren't you nominated as one of the most eligible bachelors by the Maclean's magazine at the time? Oh, I had such a crush on you. And so, anyway, we went up there and we discovered something pretty interesting, Greg and I, that, we were daunted by the route, on the black ice, on the Japanese couloir, and the mixed climbing. And when we got there, we realized that this was just all stuff that we did in the Rockies every day, or often. And we felt right at home. We did a pretty good job of it and pulled it off. So I thought, hey, why not go to the Himalayas? So in 1984, I joined this group of guys here, led by Carlos Bueller, to climb the west pillar of Makalu. And it was a big mountain, fifth highest mountain in the world, 27,000 feet in some. And first look I got at it, the left-hand skyline is the route that we were going to climb. I remember coming over the pass and seeing that thing and thinking, oh, gee, that's kind of like the Cassin Ridge times 5. And we spent 3 months on that mountain. We were trying to climb it without Sherpas, so that's why we did spend 3 months on it. And I learned a lot about altitude and a lot about Dwayne, a lot more about Albie Soul, who was on the route, or on the expedition with us. And in the end, Carlos Bueller and Dwayne Congdon came to within about 100 meters of the summit and turned around and descended through the night. And you'll notice that Dwayne looks quite slim here, and I found that high-altitude alpine climbing really helped me keep my figure quite trim. So then in 1986, Jim Alzinga led a trip to Everest, and I really wanted on that team, but I was not welcome on the voyage at first because I was a woman, right? And they were a little worried about some of them. I don't know if it was any of you guys in here or not, but were a little concerned about me disrupting the dynamics, like having a relationship with someone. I don't think so. So anyway, we climbed the west. I got on, no matter. I got on the team, and that was great. And we climbed, our intention was to climb the West Ridge, and we later deviated because we spent a month and a half stretching over 5 kilometers of rope up the mountain and carrying over 2 tons of equipment onto the mountain without Sherpas. So that's why we had these nice big strong boys to carry all those loads. And in the end, there were 4 of us that made up 2 summit bid teams. Barry Blanchard, Dwayne Congdon, Albie Soul, and myself. And this is a bit of a difficult spot for me because in the end, no, I'm not going to go to the end yet. We had to sort out who was going to go on the first summit bid team and who was going to go on the second. And Barry bowed out on the first bid team to allow me to go because there was an American woman going at about the same time, and we thought, why not be first for a change, or maybe. I didn't think I had a chance. We had a chance, so up we went. And I don't know whether it's printed on that poster Kevin, in your resume, I noticed that you said that you carried Sharon Wood's lunch up Mount Everest. And, it sounds kind of funny, but he actually did carry Sharon Wood's lunch up Mount Everest. And he and Barry and James would support Dwayne and I on our 4-day summit bid. And I finally got my chance to spend the night with Kevin Doyle. Yeah, I did, at 24,000 feet, and in a snow cave, watching the stove all night burn green, hypoxic, trying to keep James Blench alive, so Kevin wasn't really in the mood. But they did end up carrying very high on the mountain, and when those boys, Barry Blanchard and Kevin Doyle, carry your lunch all the way to Camp 6 to 27,000 feet, you make sure the next day you don't turn around until you've given it a really good try. So we got to the top, topped out at 9 o'clock at night, made it back down, but really just barely, and were met by my very special friend, our very special friend and mentor, Laurie Skreslet, was the first one to grab us and pull us in and help us out. We were in pretty bad shape. So I haven't shown you a lot of climbing pictures here, but I've shown you a few pictures of people, and in the end, for me, it's really not so important how hard or how high now. It's kind of what you end up with after it all. So 20 years later, just as a testimonial to the success of that trip, everybody showed up for a reunion, and God, we looked good, eh? And my good friend Jane Fearing, who was our base camp manager and cook, and myself, and there's Kevin. And I like to think that most of us look better than we used to look. I think we're looking better from the inside out anyway. There's Chris Perry on the left, Andrea Petzel, good friend of mine, in the middle, Trevor Jones, and here's a really good example of looking better. There's Jeff Powder on the left. Then and now. And I went through a little bit of change over time. And there's Trevor Jones in the middle again, Dave Dornian, Andrea, missing a few teeth down below, but she's better now. And I went through a few changes myself, and for a while gained some weight. And as Andrea Petzel would say, that girl needs to learn how to coil a rope. But it all came out quite well, because now I have 2 special sons, and I'm very proud of my son, my youngest son, Daniel, because it takes a lot of muscle control to keep 7 spoons on your face without any glue or aid. So it's I just like being here tonight has reminded me how special this tribe is, this tribe of people, and how much they've given me, and I want to thank everybody for being a part of that tribe, and that's all I've got to say.